Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to show how to make a very simple finance tool using Python. When we're programming, especially with something like Python, there's a few different ways programmers typically work. Sometimes you're making a program that is for somebody else. On the other hand, sometimes you're making a program that is for you and to help you automate some aspect of your life. So we're going to look at a simple example where you want to create a tool to help keep track of your finances and specifically keeping track of loan balances and making payments and accruing interest and that type of thing. So that's what we're going to do in this demo, and I will be working in idle. I am going to go ahead and create a new file. So I will have a new Python file that I'm working in. Right off the bat, I'm going to go ahead and save it somewhere that I can find it easily. And I'm going to call it finance tool. I'm going to start by adding a comment up at the top about explaining what this program is. So I will just call this my finance tool for keeping track of loans. So this is a comment, uses the hashtag, the comment symbol in Python. And so I'm going to start thinking about what are some functions that I would need in order to make this kind of tool. I want to think about what am I actually doing with these loans. There's two things typically that you have to deal with thinking about with loans. One is having the loan accrue interest, which is when the interest gets applied onto the loan balance, and the other is when you make payments on a loan. So those are the two primary things that I know that I want to handle. And I'm going to for now just add a couple of comments. I'm just sort of thinking through the problem. What am I trying to create? So I'm going to have a function for accruing interest, and I'm going to have a function for making payments. Now, I obviously also need a main function, which is where I will handle calling all of my other functions. And so I'm just going to add that down here at the bottom just so that I don't forget to put that in. Now, thinking about some other sort of helper things that might just make displaying my information easier. So I know I'm going to write a function that will handle having interest accrue and will handle making payments. Maybe I also want a function that will display my current loan balance. And the last thing I want to think about is, I'm going to be just putting a bunch of numbers on the screen. And if I'm going to be stepping away from this for a while and then coming back to using it, maybe it would be nice if every time I run it, if it also displays sort of like a big heading text right at the beginning for whatever that particular one is running. So if I was going to say make a few different versions of this for a few different accounting things that I'm keeping track of, so maybe I want to have a function that make big heading text. So that I can display a big heading right at the top every time I run this. So these are the functions I'm going to try to write, and then I will also be writing a main function which will call each of these functions. So I'm actually going to start at the accrue interest function. I think this one is maybe the easiest one to start with. So to define a function in Python, we start with the keyword def, define, and then we name our function. So I will call this accrue interest. And to accrue interest, I'm going to say we're just going to do a really simple example where we already know the interest rate. We'll just always use 6% as the interest rate. If you wanted to have a fluctuating interest rate, maybe you would want to do something more complicated here, but we're just going to do a simple 6% interest rate. So the only thing I need to know when I call this function is I need to know the current loan amount. I need to know how much is the loan currently so that I can update that value. So inside of this function, what do I need to do? Well, I'm going to start by making a new variable called loan balance. This is going to, I'm going to use this to calculate what is my new balance after I apply interest to it. So my loan balance is going to start off equal to loan amount. And then I'm going to make a second variable here called loan interest. And the loan interest, this is how much interest I want to add to the balance. So how much interest I'm going to add, we decided on 6%, which is 0.06. So that's 6% times whatever was my original loan amount. Then we update our loan balance by adding that interest amount. And then lastly, we want to return the new loan balance. So what I'm doing here, when I run this function, I'm going to take a parameter called loan amount, and that is however much the loan is currently worth. I am going to store a temporary variable called loan balance, which I will start out as being equal to loan amount, and then I will do a calculation to decide what the new loan balance should be. So I will first determine how much interest I'm going to add, and then I will add that on to the loan balance, and finally I will return the loan balance. Now you might be wondering if you could do this in fewer lines, and you could condense this into fewer lines. However, I think it is helpful to write it out on multiple lines to understand what each step is doing. But this could technically be combined together into fewer lines of code. All right, so the next one that I want to tackle is making payments. So I'm going to once again start with the DEF keyword to define a function, and I'm going to name this function make payment. And what I want to do with my make payment function is there is actually two pieces of information I will need to know at this point. I need to know how much is the loan currently, how much is currently on the loan balance, and then I also need to know how much I want to pay. Because if you've ever tried to pay down a loan, you might know that you can make payments of different amounts. You don't have to only make the minimum payment. So I do want to be able to take two values here. So I'm going to take one value called loan balance. Now notice I'm calling it something different here than loan amount. We could reuse loan amount here if we wanted to. I think it's helpful to distinguish them to see different names for things. However, this loan balance here, this only exists inside of this function, so it doesn't matter if I reuse that word. Or I could call it something different entirely. So I have a parameter called loan balance, and then I'm going to take a second parameter called payment amount. Now what I want to do in here when I make a payment is I want to figure out what is going to be the remaining balance after I make a payment. So I'm going to create once again a temporary variable. This one's going to be called remaining balance, and I'm going to start it out equal to 0. And now, much like I did last time, I'm going to do some calculations. Now, it is actually important this time that I start this out equal to 0, and I will explain why once I get to the return statement. This is actually going to save us some time a little bit later. But basically what I want to do with my remaining balance is if the loan is not paid off, so if this payment amount is less than the total balance, then I want to calculate the new balance. So if my loan balance, oops, need to spell that correctly. If my loan balance is less than or equal to the payment amount, that means the amount I put in, the amount I attempted to pay onto my loan was at least as much as the total loan balance. So probably I would not want to pay more than my loan balance, but if I did pay more than my loan balance, I'd probably get refunded the difference. And ultimately I would not owe anything at that point. So if our loan balance is less than or equal to the payment amount, then we are going to we're just going to do a print statement here to say that the loan is paid off. So we'll just do paid off like this. And in any other case, so if our loan balance is not less than or equal to the payment amount, so this means that our payment amount did not pay off the full balance, so there is some remaining balance left. So then we can calculate our remaining balance. And this would be equal to the loan balance minus the amount that we paid. Now, it would also be helpful here to print how much we paid so that we know how much was the amount that we paid. We can display that amount. And in fact, we can format it nicely so that it shows up with a dollar sign and decimal places. So I'm going to print paid and the dollar sign. And I'm going to do string formatting here. So I'm going to use the open curly bracket and then 0 and the colon, then 0.2f. So this will display it with 2 decimal places. And then I will do dot format. And then in here, whatever I put inside of these parentheses is going to replace the 0 tells us to take the first item that is inside of these parentheses. And so this whole thing is going to be replaced by whatever I put here in parentheses. In this case, I will put payment amount. And the second parenthesis here is to close off this first parenthesis for the print statement. Lastly, I want, when I'm running these functions, I want to always return something that I will then be using in the main function. So in my accrue interest function, I returned the loan balance, which was the variable I was using to keep track of my my calculations here. So in this one, I'm going to return remaining balance, which is what I've been using to calculate here. So I'm going to return, forgot the word return. I'm going to return my remaining balance. Now I mentioned that setting this equal to 0 would make something a little bit easier, and now I will explain that. If I pay off my loan, I don't want to subtract my payment amount because it's possible that if I passed a number that was too large, that this would become negative, and I don't want to see my loan balance become negative. I assume if I overpay, then they'll send me a refund for what I overpaid, and so I want to see a remaining balance of 0. So if my remaining balance is 0, I would need to set that remaining balance here inside of the if statement, but I have cut a step out of this process by starting it equal to 0. So I assume that either it will be 0 or it will be calculated in my else statement. And either way, I will return whatever is left. So if it starts out at 0, if we get into this if statement, then it will stay 0. Otherwise, if we get into this else block, we will calculate a new remaining balance, and that is what will be returned. All right, so moving on down to display, and then I'm also going to come back up here and do the heading text. So the display loan balance. So we're going to make a function here called display balance, and it is going to take a parameter. I'm just going to call this loan balance. And this is going to be actually an extremely simple function. The only thing I'm really going to do here is print out a formatted version of my loan balance using this same dot format that we used previously. So I'm going to I'm just going to do a print statement here. So I'm going to print, naming for functions is really helpful to name them in ways that you can kind of understand what's going to happen. So display balance, it has the word display in it. So this lets me think that maybe the way that I'm naming this, I'm thinking about this as just putting something on the screen. So I don't need to return anything from this function. Functions do not need to return a value. You can just print a value instead. And so I'm going to print a value here. And what I'm going to print is current balance and dollar sign, curly bracket, and just like we did before, we're going to use string formatting. And so this is the 0 is the item. We could use different numbers here if we had multiple items we wanted to display. Then there's the colon, and then 0.2f, which says to use 2 decimal places. And then dot format. And then what do we want to display? We want to display the loan balance. All right, last thing I want to do is I want to go back up to the top and make my big heading text. And so, like I said, when I'm putting things into my main function, maybe I want to be able to do this for a few different loans, or maybe I want to be able to make different versions of this. And so I want to make heading text at the top so that I can display what is this that I am showing here. So I am going to make this this function. I'm going to call it add space and capitalize. So whatever word I pass to this function, I'm going to take each letter, I'm going to uppercase it, and I'm going to put a space in between, so it makes a nice big bold heading text. And this is going to take a parameter that is a word. And now in here, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to loop through each letter in the word that is passed. And so whatever word gets passed, I am going to loop through each letter and do something with each letter. So I'm going to write a for loop that is going to loop for letter in word. And now I'm thinking about what do I want to do with each letter. So I think for this one, I want to be able to store a variable that has all these letters with the spaces in between them. And then I want to return that value when I call it. So when I call it in the main function, I want it to return whatever it does. When it does this add space and capitalize, I'm going to return the result. So just like we did previously with make payment and accrue interest, I'm going to make a temporary variable that I'm using and modifying. So I'm going to make a temporary variable called new word. And I'm going to start this equal to an empty string, just the single quotes, 2 single quotes. So this is an empty string. It currently has no letters in it. Then inside of my for loop, where I'm looping through each letter in the original word, so this is the original word here. So I'm going to loop through each letter, and I want to add those letters onto the new word. So as I loop through those letters, imagine if my word was cat, for example. So my first letter would be C, and then my next letter would be A, and then the last letter would be T. And so each time I loop through, I am accessing a single letter. So I'm going to say new word plus equals. And now this might look like math, but we can do this with letters as well when we use plus equal with letters. This is called concatenating, and this lets you stick letters together to make new strings. So we're going to use plus equals, and then we want to use the letter that we are currently accessing, whatever is our current letter that we are accessing in the word, and dot upper will make it uppercase. And then we can also add a space. So I'm adding a space here. Now, once that is done, all that is left to do is return new word. Now, this is important. Take a look at this indentation here. So the inside indentation, this is inside of the for loop. If I accidentally indent this too far, what this is going to do is it's going to hit the first letter. It is going to uppercase that letter, and then it is immediately going to return. And so I will only get a single letter out of this. So it is very important that you pay close attention to the indentation and to make sure that the indentation lines up with where it should be happening. So by being lined up with the start of the F here, that means this is not in the for loop. This is outside of the for loop. However, it is inside of the function. All right, so those are all of our functions. So the last thing to do is to set up our main function. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to define my main function. So what do I want my main function to do? I want my main function to call all of my other functions. So I'm going to start by making a variable called big text, which is going to be whatever I want to display. I could, if I had a specific name of the loan that I was working with here, maybe I could put student loan, or I could since this is just a really simple example, I'm just going to use the word finance here, but I could use anything I want here, and that would be what gets displayed by this add space and capitalize. So I need to call that function. However, one thing that's important to note, if I just call add space and capitalize, and if I pass it big text. Now the problem with this is this function does not print anything. It only returns. It returns this new word variable after I have uppercased all of the letters. And so if I'm calling it like this, I'm not using that returned value, and so it is not useful this way. So knowing that it returns a value, I want to use that value. And in particular, in this case, I want to print that value. So I'm going to wrap a print statement around this. And so now whatever is being returned, I am going to print that out. Now, just so I can start testing things, I actually want to be able to test one function at a time while I'm going through this. And so I am going to go ahead and call my main function and then test this. So the standard convention to call your main function is to do if name equals main. And this just tells Python what context you are running it in. If you're running it as a main program, then it will automatically run the main function by calling it here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to test it. And I'm probably going to find a few syntax errors. So here's one. I missed the closing parenthesis on this print statement. It's good to test and debug your code. And so I noticed there was this parenthesis was highlighted, which means I had forgotten the closed parenthesis over here. Let's try again. And now it is printing out this big word finance. Now, just to show you that you could put a different word here, I could put student loan. And now if I run this, now this second time it ran, it put student loan as my heading text. So this is useful for being able to put a heading at the top when you are running a program. So I'm going to go ahead and set this back to finance. And the next thing I want to do is I want to test out all of my functions using a specific loan. So I'm going to create a loan variable here, and I'm going to say this loan is for $12,000. I can't use the $sign here because I want to use this as a number so I can do some math on it. So I'm going to create a loan of $12,000. The first thing I want to do is I want to display my loan. So I will call the function display loan, and I will pass it the loan variable that I just created right here. So this is going to pass 12,000 into this function display loan. And let's run it and see. And I have another error to debug. And so I have misspelled the name of my function. So this is important to make sure that you name your functions and spell them the same way. So I actually called this function display balance. And so I need to retype this as display balance. I was reading this part up here, which was my comment. So now I'm displaying the balance. So let's run that. And now it is displaying $12,000. So that is perfect. It adds the $sign and it adds the 2 decimal places at the end. So that is my current loan balance. Excellent. Now let's try adding some interest. So let's say, so I have this loan balance of $12,000 and I want to apply some interest to it. Now we're going to use the accrue interest function on the loan. Now, just like I said when we called the add space and capitalize, this is returning a value. It is not printing anything. It is just returning whatever we do after our calculation. So we need to use that value here. Now, I want to show you a different way you can use a value besides printing it. You can store it in a variable, and in fact, you can store it in the same variable. So after we update, we run our calculation to figure out what is our new loan value. We can come back here and we can say our loan now equals whatever happens after we have accrued interest. So when you're calling a function, when you're making the function call, you should just assume that it does the thing that it does, and that you can use that value when it comes back. So we believe that we have made a function that correctly accrues the interest, and so we can store whatever comes back right here. And now we can test it and see if it actually does what we think it does. And I once again have misspelled my function name. And so interest. And let's try that again. All right, so it runs, but nothing is being displayed. And that's to be expected because we are returning a value here and we are storing it, but we are not using it. So after we accrue interest, let's display the updated balance. And this will once again be of our loan. So here is what happens after we have added our interest to it. And you could get out your calculator if you wanted and test to make sure this is actually 6% of the loan balance. But now we can see that it has correctly calculated the interest rate and applied it to the original balance. All right, so that's great. So let's test out our next function, which is to make a payment. And similarly to the last one, we are going to update our loan value based on what happens in that function. So I'm going to say my loan equals make payment. And I need to pass two things. And notice when you are typing, it will actually tell you what you need to pass for your parameters. So I need to pass loan balance, which is my first parameter, and I need to pass payment amount, which is the second one. So I have two things that I need to pass. The first one is my loan balance, and this is my loan variable, which I've been using here. And the second one is how much do I want to pay on that loan? And I'm going to say for my first loan payment, I'm going to pay $2,000. And just like when we accrued interest, nothing is going to be displayed for this, so we need to choose display balance. And once again, pass it our loan. Actually, one thing will get printed from this. It is going to print how much we paid on it. So this will print $2,000, and then we will display the updated balance. All right, so here we have our current balance. It starts out at $12,000. We apply interest rate to it. We make a payment, and now here is the new balance. And so notice this is $2,000 less than what was my previous balance. So that worked correctly. Now, typically what happens is that your loans continue to accrue interest until you pay them off. So let's go ahead and accrue interest again. So we'll say loan equals accrue interest. Pass it the loan again. Once again, display our balance. And we'll go ahead and make one more payment. So I'm going to say loan equals make payment. And let's go ahead and say from having run this already, I saw that my balance was less than $12,000. So I want to say I'm just going to go ahead and pay off my full balance. So I'm going to pass $12,000. I'm going to say I won the lottery and I can now pay $12,000 on my loan. And I hope that they will refund me the difference if I have overpaid. And then lastly, I will display the final balance. And I'll go ahead and run this. And I have forgotten to pass. So just to show you, I'm debugging this error here. It says missing one required positional argument, make payment amount. So I have called my make payment function with just the amount that I'm trying to pay off, and I forgot to include what is the current loan balance. So I need to send the loan balance and then the amount I'm paying. And if you ever forget, you can go back up to where you wrote your function. So I can see here I did have two parameters that I'm looking for here. All right, so let's run that again. And here we go. So I have a starting loan balance of $12,000. I apply some interest to it. I make a payment of $2,000. Then this is what I owe after my payment. Then I accrue some more interest. and then I pay off my loan, and then my remaining balance is $0. So this is a really simplified view of finance, but I hope this helps you see how you can use Python to create your own personal tools for keeping track of things, and apply this to broader applications and making your own personal tools. So I hope you have enjoyed this and found this helpful. Thanks for watching.